Today's gospel from Luke, which describes Jesus blessing the disciples and being lifted up into heaven, is the very ending of his gospel. And the first reading, of course, is the beginning of the Acts of the Apostles. And in the Acts of the Apostles, that story also begins with Jesus' ascension. So most of the New Testament then takes place after the ascension. It takes place in the absence of Jesus. In both the Gospel and the Acts of the Apostles, Jesus promised that we will receive power from on high. But this power is only given after Jesus leaves. So there's a paradox hidden in the mystery of ascension, and that is that love requires both presence and absence. In fact, the entire Bible is built on a paradox, one slipped in at the beginning of Genesis before the readers have had a chance to acclimatize fully to its strange world. The paradox is that faith requires distance in order to exist and flourish. Adam and Eve, humankind, would never know faith unless they left the garden. So we live within the tension of exclusion and embrace. Yale theologian Miroslav Volf tells the story of the adoption of their child from war-torn home country of Bosnia. Volf admits that even though he was deeply, profoundly grateful for the gift of his son, he still had a kind of a lingering negative view of a mother who would give up her baby for any reason. It just didn't seem right, and he simply couldn't understand it. That is, until he took their 3-month-old baby boy to visit the birth mother and her 10-year-old daughter, the boy's sister. The first thing I saw, Wolf said, was a tear, a huge, unforgettable tear in the big brown eyes of the 10-year-old girl. And then I saw tears in her mother's eyes. In all these tears, just enough joy mixed with pain to underscore the pain's severity. The joy at seeing him, their brother and son, and their intense pain that it was the first time they'd seen him since he was just 2 days old when they'd kissed him goodbye. It was during this exchange that Volz changed profoundly. The child's birth mother handed him a letter that she had written, and she asked Professor Wolf to read it to the boy later. "I did it for you," she wrote to her child. "Someday you will understand." Wolf reflects, she loved him for his own sake, and therefore she would rather have suffered his absence if he flourished than to have enjoyed his presence if he languished. Now, Wolf said, it was my turn to cry over the beauty and tragedy of her love. He really began to understand then what the expression "a mother's heart" means and what the love of God looks like. There is, he writes, a mother's heart at the heart of God. Consider the story in Luke's Gospel of the prodigal son. It was the prodigal's remembrance of his sonship that made his repentance possible. Forgiveness then becomes a ministry of remembering, literally a reintegration of all things into a new whole. The son excluded himself from his family. He unfathered his father, but the father would not unson his son. He kept him in his heart. In fact, in his life of exclusion in the far country, the prodigal son was probably closer to the father than his older brother, who remained at home. For like the father, he longed for an embrace. His older brother kept the father in his world, but he excluded him from his heart. For the father, the priority of relationships overrides everything. Exclusion was not a possibility. He would not build his identity around the alternatives as defined by the older brother. Either you're in or you're out. Before any rules can apply, he is a father to his sons, and his sons are brothers to one another. So the father readjusts his identity along with the changing identities of his son. And he reconstructs their broken identities and relationships. He suffers being unfathered by both, so that through his suffering, he may regain both as his sons and help them rediscover each other as brothers. At the heart of the cross is Christ's stance of not letting the other remain an enemy, of creating space in himself for the offender to come in. Jesus reminds his disciples in today's gospel of the whole gospel, that the Messiah is to suffer and to rise from the dead, and that repentance and forgiveness of sins is to be proclaimed to all the nations. The Messiah must suffer. But suffering leads to resurrection and new life. And this new life is characterized by repentance and forgiveness of sins. Remember, the Father said, "For this son of mine was dead and has come back to life." Wolff defines this drama of embrace as a play that takes place in 4 acts. He said the first of these, Act 1, is to open the arms. This is the most vulnerable gesture that one could choose to make. Like a door left open for an expected friend, they are a call to come in. No knock is necessary. For in fact, unlike an open door, open arms are a soft knock on the other's door. The second act is that of waiting. The arms reach out, but they stop before touching the other. They wait. This gives the other time to choose to embrace without any kind of pressure or manipulation. The third is the act of closing the arms. It takes 2 pair of arms for one embrace. Each is both holding and being held by the other. Without reciprocity, there is no embrace. And finally comes the fourth act, to open the arms again. As the arms are released, the identity of the self has been enriched by the presence of the other. And there may be more embraces that become necessary in the future. So the open arms are also a reminder of how the process of reconciliation began. When God sets out to embrace the enemy, the result is the cross. On the cross, the dancing circle of self-giving and mutual indwelling divine persons open up for the other, for the enemy. We, the others, we, the enemies, are embraced by the divine persons who love us with the same love with which they love each other. And therefore they make a space for us within their own eternal embrace. Words, as we know, have a relative power. But there's another language, the language of ritual. The ritual of physical embrace can say and do what words cannot. So on the night before his death, having exhausted what he could say with words, Jesus went beyond them. He gave us the Eucharist, his physical embrace, his kiss, a ritual within which Jesus holds us to his heart. The Eucharist is God's physical embrace, God's touch. At the Ascension in Luke's Gospel, Jesus, lifting up his hands, blesses the disciples. And while he was blessing them, he withdrew from them, not abandoning us, but keeping us always in his heart. And he promised us, "You'll be clothed with power from on high." He's entrusted to us this ministry of reconciliation, a ministry of remembering. Do this in memory of me.